Freddie Mercury's final 45 minutes on camera, and the three words nobody heard until later. May 30, 1991, Limehouse Studios, London. A film crew waited nervously as makeup artists worked on Freddie Mercury for the fourth consecutive hour. They weren't applying makeup for effect. They were applying it for concealment. The director had already made the decision nobody wanted to acknowledge out loud. Shoot in black and white. Color would reveal too much. The lesions, the weight loss. The truth everyone knew, but nobody could say. Freddie sat in the makeup chair, breathing shallow, each breath requiring conscious effort. When the artist finally stepped back, Freddie looked at himself in the mirror and said something that made the entire room go silent. Well, at least I still photograph well in the dark. What happened in the next 45 minutes would become Freddie Mercury's final appearance on camera. A music video for "These Are the Days of Our Lives" that was supposed to be a simple nostalgia piece became something else entirely. A deliberate, conscious goodbye filmed in real time while pretending to be just another Queen production. And those final 3 seconds when Freddie looked directly into the camera, smiled with everything he had left, and mouthed 3 words would become the most heartbreaking moment in rock history. Except most people who saw it didn't understand what they were witnessing. They were watching a man say goodbye to the world, in plain sight, while smiling. This is the story of those 45 minutes. What the crew saw, but couldn't say. What Freddie knew, but wouldn't admit. And why black and white film became the most merciful choice anyone ever made. By May 1991, everyone close to Freddie Mercury understood the situation. He'd been fighting AIDS for years, though he'd never publicly confirmed it. The disease had ravaged his body systematically, relentlessly. His weight had dropped to barely 90 pounds. Kaposi's sarcoma lesions covered parts of his skin that makeup could only partially hide. His energy came in brief, unpredictable bursts between waves of exhaustion. But Freddie wanted to work. Needed to work, actually. Because stopping meant admitting defeat, and Freddie Mercury had built an entire career on refusing to surrender to anything. Queen had been recording what would become Innuendo, their final album with Freddie. The songs were powerful, complex, some of Freddie's best vocal work despite his deteriorating condition. The Show Must Go On, recorded just months earlier, had required Freddie to drink vodka just to generate enough energy to hit the notes. Brian May had suggested they abandon it, that the vocal demands were too much. Freddie's response became legend. "I'll fucking do it, darling." And he had. One take. Voice shredded but magnificent. Now they wanted to shoot videos for the album, but video required being seen, not just heard. And being seen meant revealing what Freddie had carefully hidden from the public for years. The morning of the shoot, Jim Hutton helped Freddie dress. It took nearly an hour because every movement exhausted him. Choosing the waistcoat, a simple black one that wouldn't show how much weight he'd lost, took 15 minutes of trying different options before finding one that hung properly on his diminished frame. "I look like a scarecrow, don't I?" Freddie said, studying himself in the mirror. "You look like Freddie Mercury," Jim replied firmly. "Liar," Freddie said, but he smiled. Kind liar, though. The drive to Limehouse Studios normally took 20 minutes. They gave themselves 45 because Freddie needed frequent stops to rest, to breathe, to gather strength for what came next. The original concept for "These Are the Days of Our Lives" was straightforward nostalgia. The song itself was reflective, bittersweet, looking back at simpler times. Roger Taylor had written it thinking about his own children growing up. It wasn't meant to be a goodbye. But when the shoot date arrived and Freddie walked slowly, carefully, like each step required negotiation with his body into Limehouse Studios, everyone understood this video would become something else. The director, Rudy Dolezal, had worked with Queen before. He'd shot the innovative videos for Radio Gaga and others, but nothing had prepared him for seeing Freddie like this. When he arrived, Dolezal later recalled, "I didn't recognize him at first. This thin, frail figure moving like every step hurt. Then he smiled, and I saw Freddie in the eyes. But the body was almost gone." Here's what nobody knew until years later. Freddie had insisted on one specific condition before agreeing to the shoot. He'd called Dolezal privately the week before and said, "Whatever we film, Rudy, it has to look like me, not like a dying man. "Can you do that?" Dolezal had promised. And that promise led to the decision that would define the entire video. The decision to shoot in black and white wasn't made for artistic reasons. It was made for survival. Color would show the lesions that makeup couldn't fully conceal. Color would reveal the jaundiced tint to his skin. Color would document the physical devastation in a way that felt cruel rather than honest. Black and white offered mercy. Shadows could hide what light would expose. Contrast could suggest health where color would reveal illness. "We're making it monochrome," Dolezal told the crew. Nobody asked why. Everyone knew. But here's what the crew didn't know. Freddie had requested this specifically. Days before, he'd watched a color test shot and seen himself on a monitor. What he saw made him ask for the black and white, not to hide from the truth, but to control how the truth was revealed. The makeup process took over 4 hours, not because Freddie was being difficult or demanding perfection, but because covering the visible signs of AIDS required layers upon layers of foundation, concealer, powder. Each application had to be checked, adjusted, reinforced. The chief makeup artist, a woman who'd worked in film for 20 years, later said this was the job that almost made her quit. Not because it was difficult technically, but because with every layer I applied, I was helping a man hide his own death. And he was so grateful, kept thanking me. That gratitude nearly broke me. Freddie sat through it with patience that surprised everyone. Usually he'd joke, flirt with the crew, keep energy high. Today he was quiet, conserving every ounce of strength for what came next. At one point, the makeup artist's hand shook slightly while working near a particularly visible lesion on his cheek. Freddie noticed, placed his own hand over hers, and said gently, "It's all right, darling. I know I'm not pretty anymore. Just make me pretty enough." The artist had to step away to compose herself. In the bathroom, she cried for 5 minutes before returning to finish the job. By the time makeup was complete, Freddie looked better. Not healthy, but better. The black and white filming would do the rest. But standing was another problem entirely. The video concept was simple. The 4 members of Queen standing together, performing the song directly to camera. No elaborate staging, no theatrical elements. Just 4 friends playing music, acknowledging time passing. Simple. Except Freddie could barely stand for more than a few minutes without his legs threatening to give out. So they planned carefully. Short takes, frequent breaks. A stool just off camera that Freddie could collapse onto between shots. No one talked about it. They just positioned it there, close enough to reach quickly, far enough away to stay out of frame. What the crew didn't see during setup, Brian May checking that stool 3 times to make sure it was stable, wouldn't wobble if Freddie's weight hit it suddenly. Roger Taylor positioning himself during rehearsal so he'd be close enough to catch Freddie if he fell. John Deacon quietly asking the director to keep takes short for technical reasons, when everyone knew the real reason. Brian May, Roger Taylor, and John Deacon had discussed privately whether they should suggest postponing the shoot. Give Freddie more time to rest, regain some strength. But they all knew the truth. There was no more time. There was only now, and maybe not even much of that. When Freddie finally stepped in front of the camera, something remarkable happened. The frail, exhausted man sitting in the makeup chair disappeared. In his place stood Freddie Mercury, not the stadium-commanding, impossibly energetic performer of the 1970s and 80s, but something quieter, more essential. The core of who he'd always been, stripped of everything except the will to perform. He couldn't move much, could barely shift his weight without visible effort. But his eyes were still completely alive. The lighting director had positioned the key lights specifically to create shadows in all the right places. Shadows that would hide the hollows in Freddie's cheeks, the thinness of his neck, the way his clothes hung on a frame that had lost too much weight too fast. In the monitors, watching the black and white footage, Freddie looked almost like himself. Older, yes. Thinner, yes. But recognizably, Freddie Mercury. The crew started filming. The song began, and Freddie sang along, mouthing words he'd recorded months ago when his voice still had some strength left. Between takes, he'd shuffle immediately to the stool and sit, breathing hard from the minimal exertion. Brian would stand nearby, not hovering but present, ready to catch him if he fell. Roger would make terrible jokes trying to keep the mood light, watching Freddie's face for any sign the jokes were helping. John stayed quiet, steady, his bass in hand like an anchor. "You all right, Fred?" Brian would ask quietly during one of these breaks. "Never better, darling," Freddie would reply, and somehow make it sound almost true. Then he'd close his eyes for 30 seconds, gathering strength for the next take. But during one of these breaks, something happened that nobody discussed until years later. Freddie looked at his three bandmates, Brian, Roger, John, and said something so quietly that only they heard it. "Thank you for pretending this is normal. I couldn't do this if you weren't pretending with me." None of them responded. What could they say? They just nodded and kept pretending. The cameraman later said he'd shot thousands of hours of footage in his career, but those 45 minutes in Limehouse Studios were the hardest. Every time I looked through the viewfinder, I knew I was documenting a goodbye, and Freddie was pretending I wasn't. We were all pretending we weren't. They shot for maybe 30 minutes total, broken into 5-minute segments with 10-minute breaks between. The footage showed 4 men playing their instruments, singing a song about time passing and memories persisting. What it didn't show, what only the people in that room witnessed, was the monumental effort required for Freddie to simply stand there and exist on camera. During one break, while Freddie rested on the stool, a young production assistant approached nervously. She'd been a Queen fan her whole life, had a ticket to see them at Wembley in 1986 that her father had given her for her 16th birthday. "Mr. Mercury," she said, voice shaking slightly, "I just wanted to say thank you for everything. For the music." Freddie looked at her, really looked at her, and something in his face softened. "Darling," he said, "it's me who should be thanking you, all of you. You're the reason any of this mattered." The girl started crying. Freddie reached out and squeezed her hand with what little strength he had. Now, none of that. We're making a happy video here, aren't we?" She nodded, wiping her eyes, and walked away. But she'd understood something in that moment that wouldn't fully hit her until months later when Freddie died. She'd just witnessed someone saying goodbye while pretending they weren't. Years later, that production assistant, now a director herself, would say, "I shook Freddie Mercury's hand that day, and I felt how light it was, how fragile, like bird bones. But his grip was firm, like he was holding on to something, maybe to us, maybe to the world, maybe just to one more moment of being Freddie Mercury." The final shot was something the director hadn't planned. Freddie alone, facing the camera directly, no bandmates beside him. Just Freddie Mercury and the lens. Dolezal later said he's not entirely sure who suggested it. Maybe Freddie. Maybe it just emerged organically as they were rapping. But however it happened, they positioned Freddie center frame and rolled camera one more time. "This is the last one, Fred," Dolezal said gently. "Just be yourself. Whatever feels right." Freddie nodded, took a deep breath that everyone could see required effort, and looked into the camera. His expression was complex, not the theatrical face he'd shown audiences for 20 years. Something quieter, more real. The face of a man who knew exactly what he was doing and why. He smiled, not the wild, commanding grin of stadium performances. A smaller smile, tender almost. The smile you give someone you love when you're saying goodbye, but pretending you're not. His eyes glistened slightly, whether from emotion or exhaustion or both. Nobody could tell. But he held the camera's gaze steadily, intimately, like he was looking at each person who would ever watch this footage individually. Then he did something that wasn't scripted, wasn't discussed, wasn't planned. He mouthed 3 words directly to the camera. The audio wasn't on, he was lip-syncing to playback anyway, so nobody heard them in the moment. But watching the footage later, reading his lips, the words were unmistakable. "I still love you." Then he blew a small kiss toward the camera, and in a gesture that would become iconic, pressed his hand to his lips and extended it toward the lens. A blessing. A farewell. An acknowledgement of every person who'd ever loved Queen's music. The gesture took maybe 3 seconds. 3 seconds that would be watched and rewatched millions of times over the decades to come. The director called cut. The shot was done. Freddie immediately moved toward his stool, legs giving out halfway there. Brian May caught him before he fell, supporting his weight while trying to make it look casual, protecting Freddie's dignity even in that small moment. "That's it," Freddie said quietly to Dolezal, breathing hard. "That's all I've got today." It was the last time Freddie Mercury would ever appear on film. The crew began breaking down equipment in unusual silence. Normally there'd be chatter, jokes, the relief of a shoot completed. Today, nobody wanted to acknowledge what they'd just witnessed. Freddie sat on that stool for another 10 minutes, gathering strength for the walk to the car that would take him home to Garden Lodge. Jim Hutton, his partner, waited in the wings to help him. Mary Austin had sent flowers to the studio that morning with a note, "Thinking of you today." Before leaving, Freddie called Dolezal over. "Make me look good, darling," he said. "I know you will. You always do." "You looked perfect, Freddie," Dolezal replied, voice thick. "Liar," Freddie said with a small smile. "But a kind liar. Thank you." Then he added something that Dolezal wouldn't understand until months later. "When people watch this, I want them to remember I went out smiling. Can you make sure of that?" Dolezal promised, and he kept that promise. The video was completed and released in June 1991. The black and white footage looked artistic, nostalgic, perfectly matching the song's reflective tone. MTV played it in regular rotation. Critics praised its simplicity and emotional honesty. Fans watched it and felt something they couldn't quite name, a sadness underneath the surface that seemed deeper than normal nostalgia. Only the people who'd been in that studio knew the truth. The black and white wasn't artistic choice. It was necessity, mercy, protection. The public watched and saw Queen looking older, more contemplative. A band reflecting on their journey. They didn't see what the crew saw. A dying man using his last reserves of strength to smile at a camera and tell the world he loved them. 6 months later, on November 24, 1991, Freddie Mercury died at his home in Garden Lodge. The official announcement came the day after his death. The video for "These Are the Days of Our Lives" took on new meaning immediately. Those final 3 seconds, Freddie looking at the camera, smiling that gentle smile, mouthing those words, became something sacred. "I still love you." People who'd watched it casually before rewatched it with new understanding. That wasn't just a music video. That was a goodbye, filmed in plain sight, disguised as art, hidden in black and white shadows so we wouldn't see how hard goodbye actually was. Within days, that final gesture, the smile, the blown kiss, the mouthed words was being analyzed frame by frame. Lip readers confirmed what many suspected. "I still love you." 3 words. Freddie's final message to the millions who'd loved his music. But here's what they didn't know. Freddie had practiced that gesture at home the night before. Jim Hutton watched him stand in front of a mirror, repeating the motion over and over, making sure it looked natural, making sure the words would be readable, making sure his final message would be understood. "I have to get it right," Freddie had told Jim. "This is the last thing I'll ever give them. It has to be perfect." That's the story nobody tells about "These Are the Days of Our Lives." The 4 hours of makeup covering lesions, the frequent breaks because standing was too exhausting, the stool just off camera, the black and white film chosen not for art, but for mercy. And 3 words mouthed silently to a camera, meant for millions of people who wouldn't understand their significance until it was too late to say anything back. "I still love you." That's not just a music video. That's a man choosing to spend his last reserves of strength, making sure the people who loved him knew he loved them back. That's Freddie Mercury. Even at the end, especially at the end, giving everything to the performance, making sure his final act was love. The world saw a music video. The crew saw a goodbye. And Freddie knew exactly what he was doing. He was smiling for us. One last time. In black and white. With makeup hiding what couldn't be shown. Standing when sitting would have been easier. Smiling when crying would have been honest. Because that's what performers do. They give you the show. Even when the show costs them everything. Especially then. 30 years later, that video still plays. Those 3 seconds still break hearts. And somewhere in the black and white shadows of that final shot, Freddie Mercury is still smiling at us, still telling us he loves us, still making sure his last performance was an act of love rather than a moment of weakness. That's not just a goodbye, that's mastery, grace under pressure, dignity in the face of death. That's Freddie Mercury, doing what he did better than anyone, turning pain into performance, suffering into art, goodbye into love, all in 45 minutes, in black and white, with a smile. And we're still watching, still feeling it, still understanding a little more each time we see those 3 seconds. We still love you too.